Honestly, I didn't like Avatar: The Last Airbender as a kid. I remember seeing the commercials for it and thinking, why does he have an arrow on his head? Why does his beast also have one? That's weird, and that means that the show isn't good. That was until the summer of 2017. I was about to be a senior in high school, and my older brother was home from college. He was a big fan of the show and convinced me to watch it with him. It quickly caught my interest, and now it's one of my favorite shows of all time. While admittedly I was always intrigued by the unique and innovative magic system, what made me love Avatar so much was the characters. Fantasy is interesting, because you can create deep and well thought out magic systems with large kingdoms, villages, unique monsters, and intense battles. But if a fantasy story with these elements doesn't have interesting characters at the center of it all, then the whole world you've built falls flat. The creators of Avatar understood this, and they do a stellar job of making both the world and its characters feel interesting and real. My favorite character is, of course, the banished prince of the Fire Nation, Prince Zuko. Now I know that this is a very popular opinion, and Zuko is one of, if not the most loved characters in the show. And that's not a coincidence. In this video, I'm going to break down Zuko, his character arc, and show why Zuko works. Before we start, I will be referring to and using info from Brandon Sanderson's online lecture about characters. If you don't know, Brandon Sanderson is an acclaimed fantasy and sci-fi writer, and he has lecture series uploaded to his YouTube channel about writing sci-fi and fantasy stories. He has sections on how to write plots, world building, how to write characters, and much more. Highly recommended if you are interested in writing your own story or interested in how stories are written. If you've watched Avatar, then you know that the writers establish its characters very well, especially when they're introduced. For example, in just the first episode, the audience knows that Sokka is an overconfident, sexist, and self-assured big brother. Katara is a novice waterbender, steadfast in her morals, and not willing to back down from anyone. Zuko is similarly characterized strongly. From the get-go, the audience sees him as a determined, high-strung, and headstrong antagonist. We learn from the first few seconds of screen time that he has been looking for the Avatar for a long time, and is willing to do whatever it takes to complete his task. In his lecture, Brandon Sanderson talks about how important it is to make sure the audience cares about your characters. If you think about it, characters are what drives and pushes your world. Fights and battles seem hollow if the characters behind them aren't interesting. Brandon gives 3 ideas on how to create these interesting characters that the audience will care about. Those 3 steps are 1. Establishing empathy, 2. Establish rooting interest, and 3. Showing progress. First, let's talk about that second idea, which is establish rooting interest. What does he mean by that? Well, he means that you need to show that what the character wants is interesting to the audience. The major way to establish rooting interest is to give the character motivation. Why does the character do what they do? We all have reason behind the things we do, and it only makes sense for the characters to do the same. If a character doesn't have motivation, what reason do they have to do anything? Look at the other Avatar characters. Aang's motivation is that he's the Avatar and it's his duty to restore and keep balance in the world. Both Katara and Sokka, because of the loss of their mother, are motivated to be like their father, to help the Avatar to learn the elements and take down the Fire Lord. To take motivation a step further, Sanderson says we have to ask, why can't that character have what they want? Aang can't restore balance to the world because he hasn't mastered all 4 elements and hasn't accepted his role as the Avatar. He initially struggles because he never wanted to be the Avatar. And finally, you must have the motivation be connected to the plot. For example, Aang is the Avatar, and in order to fulfill his role as the Avatar, he must defeat the Fire Lord and restore balance to the world. Zuko as a character establishes rooting interest very well, and here's how it does that. 1. What is Zuko's motivation? He wants to return to home, be the heir that his father wants, and take his spot on the throne, and regain his honor. 2. Why can't Zuko have that? Well, he's been banished from his country by his father for refusing to fight him in Agni Kai. And that leads to 3. What is his personal connection to the plot? To regain his honor is to capture the Avatar, and to capture the Avatar would mean Aang can't defeat the Fire Lord and restore balance to the world. This is why Zuko is such a great antagonist to Aang, because his motivation and rooting interest is in direct conflict with Aang's. And that's why the episode, The Storm, is one of my favorites. In this episode, Aang is confronted by a fisherman who is angry at him for turning his back on the world. He flies away and Katara finds him later and has a conversation about his past. Meanwhile, Zuko's crew becomes irritated with his quote-unquote lack of respect. Iroh overhears them talking about Zuko. Iroh takes the opportunity to explain Zuko's past. This episode simultaneously shows the backstory of two major characters and shows how they are similar, even though up to this point, they seem very different. While we understand before this episode that Zuko needs to capture Aang, and that Aang never wanted to be the Avatar, it expounds on those ideas and fleshes out each of their rooting interests. We get to see a glimpse of Zuko's life before the Agni Kai, and similarly, we get to see Aang's life before the iceberg. We more fully understand why Aang feels the need to master the elements, and why Zuko feels he needs to capture Aang. Now, let's take a look at the first idea on how to create interesting characters: establishing empathy. Sanderson explains that establishing empathy humanizes the characters and makes the audience want them to succeed. Zuko is a character that is very easy to empathize with. He was abused by his father, lost his mother, and bullied by his sister. He was banished from his nation and lost everything he knows. When first writing the script, I was going to talk about how not much empathy is established for Zuko in the first season, but that's not necessarily true. There are a few times where Zuko sees Aang flying on Appa, but he chooses not to pursue because he's putting others in front of him. One instance where Iroh has been captured by earthbenders, and the other where he puts the safety of his crew over chasing Aang. These moments establish empathy because it goes directly against Zuko's motivation. In my opinion, these instances where Zuko acts in direct conflict with his motivation are some of his strongest moments. Zuko's motivation is inherently selfish. He wants to capture the Avatar, which would throw the world permanently out of balance, and all for his own sake. Anytime he goes against that motivation, shows the audience briefly that Zuko is capable of empathizing with others, which allows us, the audience, to empathize with Zuko. Like Aang says later in the show, anyone is capable of great good and great evil. And these moments that I've mentioned show to the audience that it is possible that Zuko is capable of great good. That being said, I do think the second season is the one that establishes the most empathy for Zuko. He was tricked by his own sister to try and come back to the Fire Nation as a prisoner. So he and Iroh are on the run from the Fire Nation and must blend in as Earth Kingdom refugees. This season shows a lot of Zuko finally seeing firsthand real people who have been hurt by his nation and the war. He interacts with regular people, not just soldiers. Bystanders who have burn scars just like him. People who have lost family to the war just like him. And it comes to a head in the season finale, where he learns Katara lost her mother to the war, just like him. Every single person who has watched Avatar roots for Zuko. They don't necessarily want him to capture Aang, but they want him to learn to change because they empathize and believe he can change. These moments where he empathizes with others makes us empathize more with him. Finally, Sanderson's third idea on how to create interesting characters is to establish progress. Or in other words, how is your character going to change? Showing a character's progress fleshes them out, makes them feel real and not stagnant. The main ways to show progress in your character is to 1. Show a flaw. 2. Establish some sort of character journey. 3. Show a sense of mystery or question. In other words, will they be able to become the thing that we know that they can become? And 4. What is supposed to change? Once again, Zuko's character strongly establishes progress. Let's go down the list. Show a flaw. Zuko's main flaw is that he doesn't understand his identity, and that's kind of the center of his whole character arc. His change of identity from the banished prince that needs to restore his honor to the compassionate Fire Lord that needs to restore the honor of his country and restore the balance of the world hand in hand with the Avatar. I think this is shown very strongly in the episode Zuko Alone. This episode is probably the most loved episode of the series because it fleshes out Zuko's character so well. At the climax of the episode, we see this scene.
Mom? Zuko, please, my love, listen to me. Everything I've done to protect you. Remember this, Zuko. No matter how things may seem to change, never forget who you are.
I always found this scene to be beautifully tragic. His mom, who he believes is all but dead, reminds him to never forget who he is. And when he is asked, "Who are you?" he says this.
My name is Zuko, son of Ursa and Fire Lord Ozai, Prince of the Fire Nation and heir to the throne.
The first time I watched this scene, it made me a little sad, because it shows that Zuko still doesn't know who he is. Even the way the village citizen responds to Zuko reminds him that he isn't who he thought he was anymore.
Liar! I heard of you! You're not a prince, you're an outcast! His own father burned and disowned him!
This character flaw of his is ingrained deep inside of Zuko, and Iroh knows it. Iroh tries to guide Zuko to understand himself, and that's why this scene hits so hard.
You never think these things through. This is exactly what happened when you captured the Avatar at the North Pole. You had him, and then you had nowhere to go.
I would have figured something out.
No! If his friends hadn't found you, you would have frozen to death.
I know my own destiny, Uncle.
Is it your own destiny? Or is it a destiny someone else has tried to force on you?
Stop it, Uncle. I have to do this.
I'm begging you, Prince Zuko. It's time for you to look inward and begin asking yourself the big questions. Who are you? And what do you want?
This is one of the only scenes where we see Iroh speak this way. He's usually pretty calm, but here he is more aggressive and forceful than usual, because it is an idea that Iroh knows needs to get into Zuko's head. Zuko has lived his whole life with the destiny that has been forced upon him. Iroh knows this, and he's trying to get Zuko to know and figure out who he is and what he wants. Now, let's look at the other ways on how to establish progress. Character journey, mystery, and what is supposed to change. I think it makes the most sense to group these together as they go hand in hand. Even as early as the first season, the audience is challenged with the question, can Zuko change? We as an audience are invited to question and hope that Zuko can change and become what he needs to be, instead of what he is expected to be. And Iroh is given as a resource for Zuko to look up to encourage him on his journey to change. The writers even show us brief moments here and there where Zuko is shown being selfless. These moments, even small, leaves us to believe as an audience that Zuko is capable of change, we actively root for that change, and he could potentially join Aang and friends. Okay, cool. Up to this point, we've shown that Zuko's character establishes empathy, rooting interest, and shows progress. But I've intentionally left out two of Zuko's major character moments that strengthen his redemption arc: the crossroads of destiny and the confrontation of his father. Like much of Zuko's character, these two moments are in direct conflict with each other. It shows Zuko making completely contrasting decisions. Let's look at the crossroads of destiny and see how it strengthens Zuko's character. Up to this point, the writers have established Zuko's empathy, motivation, constantly challenged that motivation, confronted him with his biggest flaw, and yet it's still not enough to completely flip Zuko. This part is heartbreaking to watch. I still remember viewing this for the first time and being genuinely angry with Zuko. It felt like a perfect moment for him to realize his mistakes. Just before his decision, we get this amazing moment.
It's not too late for you, Zuko. You can still redeem yourself.
The kind of redemption she offers is not for you.
Why don't you let him decide, Uncle? I need you, Zuko. I've plotted every move of this day. this glorious day in Fire Nation history, and the only way we win is together. At the end of this day, you will have your honor back. You will have Father's love. You will have everything you want.
Zuko, I am begging you, look into your heart and see what it is that you truly want.
You are free to choose.
This scene does an amazing job at showing the conflict in Zuko. His sister and uncle trying to convince him of two different sides. To either join his sister, regaining his honor and reclaiming his spot on the throne, or looking inside himself and realizing that's not who he is or what he wants. In the lecture, Sanderson opens it up to Q&A. A student asks him, "How can I make my story get my characters to become who they need to be? How can I change their motivation in a way that makes sense?" And Brandon gives this amazing answer.
You need to hit those characters in the places it will hurt, right? If what you need is a character to stop being selfish, you need their selfishness on screen at some point to cause that character a lot of pain, or the people around them a lot of pain. If you want a character to make a difficult decision later on, show them failing to make that decision early on and show the consequences, right? Hit your characters hard in their flaws if you want the story to encourage them to change.
Brandon is absolutely right. If throughout the first and second season, Zuko made every right decision, became better, and at this point joined Aang, his arc would feel so much worse. He wouldn't have felt like he really learned anything. If you want a character to feel real, you must write them like real people. Each and every one of us have learned things by failing. It's human nature. It is the failures of a character that make the successes feel so rewarding. That's why I believe this moment makes Zuko such a strong character. Between now and the confrontation of his father, Zuko realizes he hates what he's become. He doesn't feel like himself. He's angry and he doesn't know why. Again, this goes back to how Zuko's character at its core is a struggle of identity. Just after the war meeting, where he was at the right hand of his father, when he got everything he's ever wanted, Zuko says this.
So, how did it go?
When I got to the meeting, everyone welcomed me. My father had saved me a seat. He wanted me next to him. I was literally at his right hand.
Zuko, that's wonderful. You must be happy.
During the meeting, I was the perfect prince. The son my father wanted. But I wasn't me.
I think this is the moment where Zuko finally internalizes everything Iroh tried to tell him. Is it your destiny or one that has been forced upon you? What do you want? And who are you? He's finally realizing that being the son that his father wanted isn't what he wants. That everything he was told, taught, and accepted was a lie, which makes this so incredibly powerful.
For so long, all I wanted was for you to love me, to accept me. I thought it was my honor that I wanted, but really, I was just trying to please you. You, my father, who banished me just for talking out of turn. My father, who challenged me, a 13-year-old boy, to an Agni Kai. How can you possibly justify a duel with a child?
It was to teach you respect.
It was cruel, and it was wrong.
Then you've learned nothing.
No, I've learned everything, and I've had to learn it on my own. Growing up, we were taught that the Fire Nation was the greatest civilization in history, and somehow, the war was our way of sharing our greatness with the rest of the world. What an amazing lie that was. The people of the world are terrified by the Fire Nation. They don't see our greatness. They hate us, and we deserve it. We've created an era of fear in the world, and if we don't want the world to destroy itself, we need to replace it with an era of peace and kindness.
This is how you successfully change a character's motivation. I think we all knew, or at least hoped, that when watching the show, Zuko's motivation of capture the Avatar and return home with honor would change. And the writers of Avatar have not only successfully changed their character's motivation in a way that makes sense, but they did it in a way that is extremely powerful. Like Sanderson said,
hit your characters hard in their flaws if you want the story to encourage them to change.
Zuko's change didn't come all at once. It was a long process filled with lots of failure and pain. But eventually, Zuko came out of it for the better. Honestly, I wouldn't even say now, having confronted his father, that Zuko's arc is complete. While now he does know that his destiny was never to capture the Avatar, he doesn't yet understand that his destiny was always to take his spot on the throne, just not the way he thought. Not as a dictator or conqueror, but as a peacemaker to restore honor to his nation. This idea is strengthened in one of my favorite episodes, The Avatar and the Fire Lord. In this episode, Aang is shown Roku's history with Sozin, and Roku reads a scroll of Sozin's history with Avatar Roku. At the end, Zuko goes to visit Iroh in prison, and he is confused why this scroll was sent to him. This is Iroh's answer.
Understanding the struggle between your two great-grandfathers can help you better understand the battle within yourself.
Evil and good are always at war inside you, Zuko. It is your nature, your legacy. But there is a bright side. What happened generations ago can be resolved now by you. Because of your legacy, you alone can cleanse the sins of our family and the Fire Nation. Born in you, along with all the strife, is the power to restore balance to the world.
To understand his grandfather's struggle is to understand the struggle in himself, the struggle of good and evil, the struggle of identity. This is when the idea that Zuko has the power to cleanse the sins of his family and restore balance to the world is introduced to him. Also, it's impossible to talk about how incredible Zuko's redemption arc is without acknowledging Uncle Iroh. While Iroh doesn't have much of a character arc, he is the steady and wise force in Zuko's life. After the disappearance of Zuko's mother, Iroh is the only real parental figure in Zuko's life. Iroh's bond with Zuko is what makes his fail at bossing Say so great. Not only did Zuko fail himself and his internal struggle, he failed the only other person in his life who was always by his side. But what I think makes Zuko's eventual turn so strong is that he makes the decision on his own. Yes, he was guided and helped by Iroh, but it was his decision to confront his father on the eclipse. He knows his father's plan to destroy the Earth Kingdom. He knows success is near impossible. Yet, he still decides to go against his father and help to defeat the very institution he was brought up in. He also knows the damage he's done, how he's terrorized the world, how he hurt others, and how he betrayed his uncle. He carries the weight of that and tries to make it right. That's why this is my favorite scene in the show.
I am so sorry, Uncle. I am so sorry and ashamed of what I did. I don't know how I can ever make it up to you, but How can you forgive me so easily? I thought you would be furious with me.
I was never angry with you. I was sad because I was afraid you lost your way.
I did lose my way.
But you found it again. And you did it by yourself. And I'm so happy you found your way here.
Zuko's character arc is based around his identity, which is supported by his strong motivation. Here, he thinks he knows who he is. Here, he is unsure. And finally, he realizes what he needs to do. Zuko struggled and fought to understand who he is and what he wants. Zuko's motivation changes, and that's why Zuko works.
All hail Fire Lord Zuko!
If you stuck around and watched this whole thing, I can't thank you enough. It was a lot longer and a much bigger project than I initially thought. If you liked this video and my other content, consider subscribing and leaving a like. It means a lot to me and I appreciate any support. Thanks for watching and supporting my content.